can't get out there if you're going to break down. Just not going to happen. But before I actually get into what Kevin Lindsey and I are going to be talking about today, Dre, you asked the question, and I think it needs to be asked of Kevin Lindsey as well. So I don't know if you know this, Kevin, and you guys know who Kevin is. He's the manager of technical service at TravelCenters of America. This crazy Spanish guy who is a serial Guinness Book of World record breaker set the record, broke his own record for running backwards in high heels. Insane. What Dre asked me, though, was, is there any record that I would like to just either invent or know somebody has? Tom Cruise, I don't know if you know this, holds the record for the most times jumping out of an airplane with the parachute on fire.
Nice.
And he broke some other guy's record. Can you imagine the guy being like, can Tom Cruise not have this record? He has everything else. Why can't I have my flaming parachute record? Good morning, Kevin. How are you, man?
I'm all right, as long as I'm not jumping out of an airplane with a parachute on fire.
Come on.
It's crazy. You watch that movie, you watch the movie that he made to do it, and it's like you see him jump out of the airplane and you realize there's a crew of people with parachutes on who are jumping out the plane at the same time, filming him with a parachute on fire. So if you think maintenance matters in what we do, that's when maintenance really matters, because the second parachute needs to work. It absolutely
it better work. It better work. Right?
Oh my God! Because if it doesn't, you are in what they would say deep doo-doo. Okay, that's enough of me making fun of Tom Cruise and picking on you. Oh, I do have a question for you. It's my question of the day. Where are you most in shape? I think is the proper way to ask that question. Like, is it your legs, your shoulders, your back? What is one part as we get older that you're not worried about falling apart on you? Dave Nemo's got great arms. He's got great guns. What about you?
I don't know. I don't know what I would say.
Well, think about it.
But honestly, I would say probably my arms, and maybe that has something to do with the old drummer in me as well. So.
Oh, I thought you were going to say your brain, Kevin.
Actually, I was.
But he's a modest man.
Yeah.
He's a modest man.
Well, I do a lot of puzzles and stuff. When I first wake up in the morning, that's actually what I do is I pick up a tablet and my phone and I do some puzzles to get my brain stimulated. So
it's really kind of crazy, Kevin. My dad's dad, towards the end of his life in his mid-'80s, got dementia, and they were all kind of surprised that it arrived so late. And what the doctor said, he goes, it should have arrived earlier. He said, but your father was a serial crossword puzzler. Did it all the time. And he said, I won't lie to you. He said, I really think that it held a genetic condition at bay a lot longer than it should have. That he loved them so much. And that, by the way, is a lot of people don't realize this, that people get told if you're going to be a regular video game player, play the puzzle games. They tell people play the puzzle games, do crossword puzzles, play Sudoku. Today's National Sudoku Day. Another bizarre piece of information for you. Enjoy that. But yeah, all that stuff is important. It's important.
I think it is. I really do. And what's funny about it, as I do those puzzles and stuff in the morning, they actually help me knowing things I left on the table from yesterday, where I was asked about this problem or that problem with the truck, and it's almost like putting that piece of puzzle together. It's what I do all day, every day. It feels like, but I guess that's one reason I kind of do that. So it gets my brain jump started into that mode of, hey, you got to figure this out. So.
My mom was noticing that she would come downstairs in the morning and my dad would always be on his phone, and she's like, I really worry about you being on that phone. She thought he was doom scrolling. She gets over and she realizes he is a chronic Scrabble player on his phone. And she saw that and she went, never mind, keep on doing that. She said, there's a reason why at 82 years old you're still sharp as a tack. Never mind. You do you make it happen. But people don't realize that the idea of, I'm telling you, if you take a brisk 20-minute walk to wake up in the morning and then come home and over your coffee, take the time to do the crosswords, that is neither one of those two things is wasting time as you get older. That is actually making more time. You waste time to create more time in your life. Okay, so we were talking about last time you and I met with other people, 9 of the top 10 fault codes that we see in shops are after treatment related. And you thought that maybe we should revisit that, correct?
I I did. I kind of felt like I mean I know we hit on uh, basically all the content that I'd shared with you and everything, but I got to thinking about it and I was like, there's so much that's going on out there, even right now, and not that I get into the politics of EPA requirements and all that stuff, but there was a article recently that I read that kind of it it kind of I don't know what's a good word, irked me a little bit because
That's a
the
good word.
title of it, well, the title of it was that the EPA is going to curb DEF shutdowns in both new and existing trucks, something like that. I can't remember, but I'm like, well, wait a minute, DEF don't shut down the engine as it is now anyway. It only it limits you to 5 miles an hour, and you may not be able to go very far above the 600 RPMs or something for idle purposes, but it don't shut them down, because that's one of the key things I've always told technicians and drivers over the years, since the SCR systems came out. I said, the SCR system in most cases is not going to shut it down. It'll derate it. It'll derate the snot out of it, to where you can only crawl around in first gear, but it won't shut the engine down. I mean, you may as well be shut down if all you got's granny gear, right? So, but I wanted to make sure that everyone really understood that it really, that's one way of telling what type of issue you have. Because if that check engine, stop engine light hasn't come on, and it actually physically shut the engine off, killed the engine, at idle, then it most likely the issue you have is SCR related. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. If in fact it's shutting down, then yeah, I mean, if it in fact is shutting down, then there's a real problem. And it's not just, I mean, I what I
Yeah,
didn't what it,
yeah.
what I didn't like I said, I mean, because, and like I said, I know it's hyperbolic, and I know a lot of people, as you said, this is really important, because I might as well be shut down while being metaphorically correct is not technically true, because what's happening there is it's preventing you from having catastrophic maintenance failure, whereas shutting
Well,
down is
yeah.
catastrophic maintenance failure. Correct? Did I get that right?
Exactly, and that's I'm a technical guy, so it really irks me a little bit when I, when I see people kind of smart people kind of not necessarily get things wrong, but that can be misleading to those that may not know and may not understand, and I've never thought that was fair, to try to not intentionally misleading anyone, but that's just the way people's think, but being a technical guy, I get a little hung up on certain things.
No, and by the way, Kevin, it's a really great point though, because the implication in the pitch, which they didn't need to make, what they could have said is that it's the responsibility of the driver not to have this system shut them down so quickly, not to have this system
Right.
drop them down to 5 miles an hour so quickly, to give them a little bit more
Well,
maneuverability and leeway, as opposed to somehow letting the general public know there's a system inside this truck that's absolutely destroying trucks. That's not what's happening. And
no.
there is in the phraseology, I get where you're coming from. It's like, guys, the truth alone is bad enough. You can just tell people the truth and not somehow imply that we're blowing people's engines out here. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't need
Yeah.
to make up stuff that the federal government does that's stupid. It does enough stuff on its own without any help. I get where you're coming from.
Well, you've got to have a law degree in order to read through some of the regulations and stuff, right? I mean,
Who do you think writes them?
some of these things so complex. It's like, you they need to have someone that can actually really simplify that stuff and put everything in layman's terms for everybody.
Although I did have somebody once, just to kind of give everybody a heads up why these things are so complexly written. They are written because they want to make sure that they are trying to prevent as much as they can different interpretations of statutes.
Yes,
It,
and that's what it is.
that's
It is.
that's what it really is. But you do wish that there would be somebody who would show up and be like, "Okay, I'm going to explain this the best I can." You know what I'm saying?
Well,
You
and
know, yeah.
yeah, and as someone who does some technical writing, I totally get that because as you read back, because usually my first draft of anything that's technical that I'm writing, I kind of read back through it. But in my first draft, I'm like, well, all right, I said this way that could be interpreted. That's not how I want to make sure it don't get interpreted that the wrong way.
Right.
That it needs to be this way. So yeah, I get that.
Yeah. But at the same time, like I said, I mean, somebody will tell people it's like, it's in the bill, you've got to read it. But a lot of that is to prevent people from, playing games, saying, according to my interpretation of the law, ignorance is not a defense, but vagueness is.
But it is bliss, though.
Yeah. Oh my God, I got to tell you. Let's. One of the things we didn't really talk about, I would love you to kind of do this for me, is just kind of take us through. And we started this, but didn't kind of get through it. Talk about diesel exhaust fluid. I mean, everybody knows what DEF is, but really talk about what it is and some really crucial facts that people should know about it, because I think it does relate to the new edict from the federal government.
Well, and I agree 100% because I can tell you one of the biggest things that I saw early on with DEF was that people really didn't understand it. I kind of alluded to a story that I got, from a driver about wanting to put, something in it to keep it from freezing. Don't. It's going to freeze around 12. Start freezing around 12 degrees. You can't stop that. But DEF itself, as it's manufactured, it's 67.5% automotive grade or automotive grade urea, basically, that is kind of electrochemically combined with 32.5% deionized water. So when you really think about that, it takes a chemical reaction for them to combine those two components, right? To get that compound of DEF. But what I always tell people is you got to remember something. If it takes a chemical reaction to combine two components, it also takes a chemical reaction for them to separate. Now, one of the most common chemical reactions, and we don't think of it as a chemical reaction, but we deal with it every single day in the weather, is evaporation. So when you stop and think about that, if you've got these components that are, in a contained environment, like a DEF tank, like a DEF storage tank, if it sits like this time of year out in the sun or something like that, and it heats up during the day, what happens at night? Well, let's say that tank is half full, right? If it only has half of its capacity in that tank, well, at night, once everything cools down, well, it heated that DEF liquid up inside that tank. Well, with heat transfer, it always works this way, but heat always moves from hot to cold, right? That's just the direction of flow. So really what happens is as the heat moves out of that tank, you will get some evaporation because the heat can move out, but the liquid can't, right? So what happens is as it goes out, the inside of that tank will sweat. Well, as it passes through that plastic container, whatever type of material it's in, as the heat passes through it, from the air, just the half air that's in it, well, there's going to be moisture in that air. Well, that moisture is going to collect on the side of that tank and run down, and it's going to mix with that already 32.5% deionized water that's combined to make that DEF. So now you've got more like, as that happens maybe one time with a half a tank, let's say, you may have now 33% water. The next day it may be 33.5. So next thing you know, it can get diluted by itself over time like that, just from heating up, cooling down in a closed container. So I think that's something, a lot of people don't think about, and can that happen while it's on the truck? Well, sure it can, but most of the time it's cycling and moving, through the truck, right? It's being pumped out as the truck's running, and of course it heats up and cools down as well. But it's got over time that can affect it. So if you don't operate the truck that much and you're not constantly refilling the DEF tank and stuff like that, you can get, I don't know, for lack of a better term, I'll just say stale DEF. Where it may be slightly diluted or something like that. So
let me ask you a question, and this is I don't know the answer. This isn't like I know what the answer is going to be. So okay, so DEF in regards to at least smaller quantities appears as clear.
Yes.
Given what we're talking about here, as that dilution occurs, are we talking about, usually, in the case of oil, in the case of a lot of other kind of, fluids that move through your truck, liquids that move through your truck, a lot of stuff gets thicker. Does DEF get thinner?
It can, right? If it gets, if it does get diluted like that, watered down. The other thing that can happen if it's open like that, that heat could go out through an opening, escaping, which is actually going to create some evaporation, which now you could end up with a higher amount of the urea side of that in there, which means now it's over concentrated, which I'm not going to say is thicker, but in a sense, right?
Yeah.
So it could work either way, just depending on how it's been stored and everything, right?
So in regards to the what's not right moment, if you have too much deionized water, what are the implications as opposed to having too much urea electrochemically combined with deionized water? What if you have too much urea?
I used to do a little experiment I would play with when this stuff first came out with, and I was teaching classes and trying to show technicians and mechanics how this stuff works. But I would take a cup and fill it about like a styrofoam cup, like a styrofoam coffee cup, small, whatever those are, like 10 ounces or whatever. But I would fill it about halfway up with DEF, and I would just set it on my windowsill in my training room for 3 or 4 weeks. Well, this stuff would evaporate and it becomes this white crystal. And I'm sure everyone saw that, some of the stuff I sent you had a picture of some of that as it cakes up around there when you see DEF leaks and different things like that. It'll turn to this white crystal looking stuff. And it kind of crawls and creeps out of that cup. Well, what I used to do is I would have different bottles. I'd have a good bottle of DEF that tests perfectly, have another one of water and like household ammonia, so it smelled like DEF, but it don't test like DEF. I'm just trying to show people how to properly test it, right? Well, one of the other ones I would do is I would take water and then I would take that where that DEF is crystallized and just put it back into like a bottle of water, shake it up to dissolve it. So now it's dissolved in it, and I could get a perfect reading out of it. But it's only dissolved in it. It's not chemically combined. So what happens since it's dissolved in it, it's just suspended in the water. So when that water, if you stop and think about that from kind of a chemistry standpoint, what happens to water when it hits 900 degree air? It's going to immediately evaporate. Right?
Oh yeah, gone.
So then that white crystal that I dissolved in it just falls right out, and it starts plugging up, where that DEF's being injected into that exhaust stream. So the water just evaporates. So you got a lot of water vapor coming out of the exhaust stack, but at the same time on the inside, you got crystallized DEF just building up, right? So now it starts messing with the airflow. So now, even if you correct it, the airflow is messed up, so you may not get that good mixture, so that it's not quite as efficient as it should be. And I think that's some of the things that mislead people when they have some of these long-term issues, repeated issues with the DEF system, with the SCR side of the system,
That, by the way,
things like that have happened at times. So.
That, by the way, leads to the title of this segment, the ongoing title. What is the maintenance solution? Not what is the I screwed myself. And by the way, as we said, if you drop down to 5 miles an hour, you have not screwed yourself. I got it. This is it. If in fact you slow down to 5 miles an hour, you have massively inconvenienced yourself. If you actually shut down, you have screwed yourself. That's kind of a good way to look at it. So how do we make sure, other than like realizing that when we slow down to 5 miles an hour, that maybe we should probably get this taken care of? What is the maintenance solution here? I mean, like I said, not just avoiding, not just kind of cycling this through and kind of changing it over, but genuinely avoiding stuff like crystals, because all of that stuff can end up being death by a thousand cuts. Kevin,
Yeah.
if I get this wrong, please tell me, but it just seems to me that there's a lot of stuff that can begin to accumulate, even if you're doing the simple stuff like kind of doing basic maintenance when it comes to this stuff. What are the bigger solutions here?
Well, I think first of all, you got to understand DEF. It does have a shelf life. Okay. So it really is going to depend on where you're getting your supply of DEF from. If you're an owner operator, hey, you walk into some dime store, dollar store, whatever you want to call them nowadays, and they have a big display of DEF and it's on sale and it's cheaper than hey, I'm gonna buy 4 or 5 of these 2.5 gallon jugs or whatever and go fill my truck up with this. Well, look at there is a date code on it, and it may not be as simple as, hey, this expires, blah blah blah. It'll just have a series of numbers, but somewhere on that package is a phone number to call the manufacturer and give them that code, and they can tell you when it expires. But what you got to remember is, has it been stored above 86 degrees for any extended period of time? In a trailer sitting on a lot somewhere in Arizona, for more than 8 hours, and it's 118 degrees outside. Well, it's 118 inside of there. So guess what? That shelf life just deteriorated some. So, those are things that I think kind of get overlooked, but that's because I think a lot of people don't realize that the actual DEF does have a shelf life, So one thing to keep in mind that typically as it's usually good for a year, below 86 degrees, and as long as it's not stored in direct sunlight, because direct sunlight will affect that as well. So just because of that whole evaporation thing I'm talking about. So. But once it's stored above 95 degrees, that can actually decrease the shelf life to about 6 months is all it's good for. So, don't, it's good to have those extra ones that you have underneath the bunk of the truck, in case you run out going down the road. I get that, but, use those, use them for an emergency, but remember when you got them and don't just pull it out, 2 years later and pour it in there, expect everything to work fine.
Yeah, it ain't like having an air conditioned
Yeah.
filter in your house where that thing's got a shelf life of 1,000 years and a radioactive half life of like 50,000 years. This is something a little bit different. I mean, it's basically it's down to food cans. Please check the can and the expiration date. I mean, figure out how long you got. I mean, if you're going to get that stuff, make sure that anything you're putting in your cab you intend on using sooner rather than later, and putting it in a position where you're going to maximize how long it can live. That's really kind of a crucial thing too. All right, so that's part of it as well. But I keep on kind of going back to the idea too that how do we prevent the death by a thousand cuts? Not only to make sure that we've got the best stuff in our truck, but also making sure that the kind of daily maintenance of it, getting the other stuff out of there. You mentioned the crystals as well and the blockage and all that kind of stuff. You can change stuff over as much as you like. If there's stuff that's actually blocking stuff up, it doesn't make any difference, right?
No, exactly, right. I mean, it really don't. You just got to pay attention, right? Understand the ins and outs of what can cause some issues, and just kind of pay attention to it. I don't mean to try to oversimplify some of this stuff, but the reality of it is it's not necessarily that complicated. I mean, I'm just an old hillbillies, and if I've gotten myself to understand it over the years. So I figure if I can, most anybody should be able to.
By the way, that's not a bad selling point, by the way. I figure if I can explain this and I actually understand it, there's no reason why you can't grasp the basic concept. That's what I put my faith in half the time, by the way. And, I did mention air filters, by the way, and I want to touch on this very, very quickly because we've only got about a minute left here. But, sometimes it's simple. We go back to the pre-trip inspection, too. Just a couple of things to look at. Just make sure that stuff is where it needs to be or doesn't look like it's where it doesn't need to be, and you should be good to go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you got to remember the whole goal of the entire after treatment system is really, clean air in, cleaner air out, right? So if you have dirty air coming in or restricted air coming in, it's harder for that engine to make it cleaner going out, right? So I could never emphasize enough how critical air filters truly are nowadays, compared to years past. But that's, and they're, I think I've mentioned this before, they're so much more expensive nowadays than they used to be. And I understand, maintenance costs and everything, but that's truly one of those things it's really, really critical not to cut corners and try to stretch those air filter intervals and stuff out too much.
Oh, I'm telling you right now, as an old HVAC guy on the simplest level, as a guy who actually works with HVAC, I can't tell you the number of customers we used to tell, would you just please change your filters? By the way,
right?
I have the final analogy for you. Slowing down to 5 miles an hour is 3 Mile Island. Shutting down is Chernobyl. That's the way to kind of think about it. That's the way to think about it.
Hey, I like that.
Because people all think that 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl were the same thing. 3 Mile Island was the system worked and systematically shut the system down and saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans. The Russians didn't care about that kind of stuff, and so they just simply drove a core into the earth. Kevin Lindsey always gets to the core of the matter on maintenance matters. He joins us on Tuesday on a regular basis. Man, that went by fast. We had a lot left to talk about, my brother. Go be safe and sound out there. Have a great week, okay?